What's going on, Macro Perspective Pete's? Guys, Seamus and Marcos here. We got a great guest today. We got Michael Mucciolo. I hope I said that right. From the Functional Patterns, especially the headquarters out there, Functional Patterns in Santa Monica. The reason I really wanted to have Michael on the podcast today was due to the fact that he did a great job of communicating everything functional patterns on the Mark Bell Power Project. And I think Mark Bell did a great job of keeping the clientele open, the audience open. And I just wanted to continue on that. My understanding of functional patterns is I've known about it for close to almost 10 years, but never really delved deep into it. Now I'm getting a little more curious just because the communication of it has been really interesting, it's been really cool. So with that being said, I'm gonna let Marcos ask the first few questions. But Mike, first off, introduce yourself. Who are you? And then we'll let Marcos ask some questions, my man.
Sure, right on. I'm Mike Mucciolo. I am, and I understand my last name, Italian last name. It's a little bit confusing, so no worries there. But so yeah, so I was in New York for a while. So I'll just do a quick backstory. I was in New York originally. I'm from Florida originally, and then I went to New York, and then I was working at a box gym, flagship location. I learned a lot. It was great, actually. It was a great start. I feel very lucky to have had that job, and I knew a lot of very intelligent trainers. And there were things that I was just noticing with clients and with just people who had done a lot of lifting or yoga, et cetera, in general, and also just the main thing was my personal experience was that I wanted to feel better. I definitely had always lifted. I had always done things like yoga, etc., but I never felt like I could move that well. I was never, and that was the thing. I didn't even have a poor level of athletic potential per se, but I just didn't have like a framework to really understand movement. I didn't play many sports like growing up, and then anytime I tried to like get into a sport, it always felt like I was really only gaining very minimally. And I also noticed that people around my age also were having a very difficult time becoming objectively like better movers outside of progressive overload. And even then, there was always, for the most part, your 40-year-old desk jockey would hit a certain weight and then be there. And then in a year, if they added 5 more pounds to that, it was like, oh, great. Okay. Yeah, that's progress. And I just couldn't buy into that anymore. I was like that. I was like, oh, I got 5 more pounds on my bench press this year. That's great. It was like, okay, well, clearly this is just like not working for me the way that I think that it should. And then that I didn't really have a framework, so that's when I started buying more into functional patterns. At first, I was just like copying dynamic movements on their from their Instagram, because it's probably kind of similar to your situation, Seamus. It was just like functional training was becoming more in vogue, right? It was already starting to like people were using like the Vipers and doing more three-dimensional movement, and they were like, oh, it should be you should do lifting, but then you should also do activities that are more relevant to your daily living, right? So that's why, and they would call that functional. It's like, okay, but then functional patterns gave this very non-compromising framework that I just identified with, which was the whole idea. Hey, listen, if we observe a human organism in real time, what are they doing? They're mostly walking, right? Generally speaking, there's a walking pattern in most classical sports. I say classical sports because you can kind of like, even in the Olympics, there's like synchronized swimming, right? It's like, well, that's not necessarily the same as what I'm talking about when I say most sports involve like running, throwing, jumping, right? And even jumping is like we call that a derivative of gait. So they're saying, okay, this is the root of it, and then you get squats, you get single leg lunges, and you get jumping, and you get seated positions, right? You get rotational positions, you get swinging motions from throwing. When you box, you throw a punch, you're essentially throwing your arms, you're throwing your legs. So that really made sense to me. So I was like, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then I was seeing like, okay, they're doing these scoliosis corrections and stuff like that too. And I was like, well, that's pretty impressive. That's typically people will see like the scoliosis corrections is like, well, at the very least, usually people give us that. It's like, well, you don't really see that very much in the industry. Most of the time, these things are just normalized. It's like, okay, there's an idiopathic scoliosis, so what? They should still deadlift. They should still do shit like And we're literally just saying, well, there might be a better way, essentially. So anyway, then once I got my first course, I changed all my programming, came back. Anybody that would do it, I would change over to functional patterns. And then that's just what I've been teaching ever since. I eventually moved to Santa Monica and have been, and because I wanted my own space. I eventually was like, okay, I want room. Luckily at the place that I worked, they were into quote unquote functional training. So I was able to blend in a little bit. But for the most part, I was like, when I'm doing the corrective work and stuff like that, I need to be able to have everything that I need at my disposal. So that way we can really take it to the next level. And then that's how I ended up in Santa Monica.
Good deal. All right. I feel like Seamus and I share this kind of concept as well with like the derivatives of functional movement. My background's like CrossFit oriented, right? So there was functional movement patterns, right? Or so to speak, what they are. But even in my head, I'm like, certain things go beyond, quote, the realms of function, once you're trying to do it at a competitive lens, right? And if so facto now at soon to be 31, I definitely take more into consideration, like with your approach, I like more so align with like, I want my body to feel like it's not broken. I want to look in the mirror and not see asymmetries, right? And I actually do have like that scoliosis kind of issue, or my body's just like shifted, whether it's like through my spine or whether it's through my like rib cage. Don't really know, but I'm like that was like when Seamus mentioned like really bringing you on, like it was like selfishly, I was like, all right, maybe I'll hear some things and actually get started and change shit up again, because it's like this constant journey of being able to like do things that like you think will yield more benefit for yourself, like, right? I feel like it was like some of my selfish endeavor for yourself, right? Yeah. And I think that's what makes a great practitioner too, is like anecdotally I sucked at this thing, but I love how this in my body responded. I bet so many other people could experience the same thing, right?
100%.
Yeah, that's
So yeah. So
so like
did you want to expand more?
yeah, I did want to say, so like
Gotcha.
you, again, I was super fascinated with that concept, like you guys have mentioned, throwing and gait, right? And improving those two things like at its like core and fundamental levels, right? Like I think my first question is like, where do we start? Like what is something that people start with that's like applicable? Because I feel like our general listener is like really into like applying something super simple and seeing if they can get some feedback from it.
Sure. So, in terms of that, what I always say is I recommend the 10-week course. And the reason I say that is because, and there are just like little things that I'll say that will resonate with people. I can't necessarily say, yeah, when you're like standing, you want to think about this or whatever the case may be, because that's like, it's very idiosyncratic to the person, number one. Because I could say, like for example, most people are anteriorly shifted. So I could just say, in terms of their pelvis, so I could just say, yeah, shift your hips back. But how you shift your hips back is a very important thing. You know what I'm saying? You can't just say, like I might say, okay, so when you're standing, you want your hips to be shifted back and you want your ribs to be in front of you. And people will think about that and it'll give them an initial reference point, but then they need a stimulus, right?
Hmm.
Typically, most people are anteriorly shifted because they're skipping the first function of extension through their glutes, right? But then how you end up addressing that, that's where something like the 10-week course really comes into play. Because initially, I mean, maybe you would or would not be surprised. Some people are surprised to hear that some people, like I had a guy come in that can only stand for a few minutes at a time without it, unless I am like, okay, no, this needs to be like this, blah, blah, blah. I literally am like hands on being like, you need to create tension here. Your hips need to be here. Your ribs need to be here, right? We're doing that in seated and standing positions. And that's literally the whole workout. Now, this is somebody who's on the far end of the spectrum, right? Of course, I also
Yeah.
have people on the other end of the spectrum that it's like, I'm a pro athlete. I keep getting groin and lower back pain, and I need to be able to run my routes. So what do I do? How do I make that better? So, but you'd be surprised too, just with that, like the things that I do sometimes with people just right off the bat, I will still do with pro level athletes. Like you would be very
Hmm.
surprised what fundamental things that they're missing, literally just like they don't even know that they have like their weight split 50-50 as opposed to majority of weight on one leg or the other leg. You know what I'm saying? It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
okay, well, when you take a step, you need to pick a leg and be on that leg. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about people at
Yeah.
high professional levels that like don't even know that. So
Well,
anyway,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, no, for sure, for sure. But in conclusion with that, myofascial release is typically where we start people. It won't
Hmm.
always be the thing that we start with people if they come in for a consult with us, because in many instances we'll say, maybe I'll show you like a couple releases that you can do on your own. But the tensioning, the giving yourself the neuromuscular stimulus of like, okay, this is where my body needs to be in space. And then I'm going to
Hmm.
give you an exercise that promotes that and creates tension there, that quote unquote traumatizes you to stay in that position. That is what really makes things stick. So that's why it's like the corrective exercise is the thing that really changes the game. And that's what the 10-week course introduces for people.
That's really
Gotcha.
that's really good actually. I like the way you explained that cuz first off, like on the comment on athletes, like working with like D1 athletes and like working with some of these top guys, it's crazy how they're just human like us. So as a human, they're great at compensating. But it becomes like their gift, you know, whether you're like, let's say a rotational athlete, well, you probably adapted that way, you know, you're going to swing only one way for like golf or whatever. And
Sure.
you need that for your sport. You need that to make the millions of dollars, or you need to jump off that one leg. So there's probably a lot of imbalances. I know that from myself from being a wrestler, left leg forward, right leg back. My hip is fully into extension, hip flexor's too tight, things like this. So having to balance it out helps a lot. But then does that steal from my sport? I learned that it actually helped me in my sport, where most people will be like, no, I can't lose the edge. So it's a really good point. I also like to point out the fact that like your 10-week course is about myofascial release. And like I don't think myofascial release is this new concept. I know Dr. Kelly Starrett was talking about it with Supple Leopard, and he was probably one of the first ones after the Rolfing method to really pioneer it in like the social media space.
Sure.
But what I didn't really understand with Dr. Kelly Starrett, and I think maybe you guys got it down, is he kind of, I mean, with the book, how I remember it, like, you know, he's doing like foam rolling, tacking things down, using voodoo floss, which is really good, temporal stuff, like to help with like joint mechanics.
Sure.
From my understanding, what you guys are doing is you're taking the myofascial system and then adding on top of the release to then put it back into again, like what you say, traumatizing into a place where like now you're corrected into that. I know he does that too, but I think you guys like have this 10-week course. It's Can you talk more about like maybe like the correctives maybe you can see around like the gait? Like I'll use myself as an example. I did do some of your functional cross step chest press movement.
Uh-huh.
I use that. I told Marcos I was using it as like a diagnostic tool.
Right.
And on my left side, my kinematics from my toes, all the way from my toes to my hip, everything was aligned on this cross step chest press.
Right.
I do my right side. I do my right side. Major energy leaks from my pinky toe to my LCL knee, glute and low back and oblique. Everything's falling apart, and it's not even 10 pounds. It's not even 10 pounds, and I'm like, what is going on? Can you kind of speak upon that? Maybe like that as an example, you know?
Sure. So really what I'll say is like the 10-week course builds up to what you see online, which is the reciprocal row and the reciprocal press. So that's exactly what they are, as diagnostic. So every movement that you do can be a diagnostic essentially. I won't get into like the nuts and bolts of it, but essentially the reason why they're so effective is because they include rotation, right? So as soon as you start rotating people, that's when things start to fall apart, just like you have figured out for yourself. So that's why something like the 10-week course can be so important, because you'd be surprised how in tune your average person will become by nature of just saying, whoa, I can't even take a step forward without there being some sort of like compensation. Like I said, most people, when they take a step forward, they end up 50-50. They're not even actually transferring their weight. You'd be surprised how many people, there's people that I've trained for 6 to 8 months sometimes, and they don't know how to line up in a contralateral fashion, right? Which is crazy. So if you think about it, it's like if you don't even have the proprioception to know that, or to recognize that, or to learn that, then what are you doing when you do something like tennis or basketball or any of these other sports? You know what I'm saying? If you can't take it out of the isolated context at all, and listen, I understand that we can't at this moment in time per se, but we're getting closer and closer. We can't just make a 100% simulation of exactly what you're going to be doing. But that's the whole idea, is that when you do it, is that you want to get as close as you can, and working with gait is probably going to be the closest that you're going to get, because it includes all of those elements of what you're going to probably be doing. Even wrestling, right? Wrestling is a gait system. When you're lining up with your left leg forward and right leg back, right? That is a gait system. Or striking, right? That's the same thing. Many people will be right hand dominant. They're left leg forward, right leg back, right? It's not as simple as just saying, okay, I'm going to switch stances, because then you're not going to be able to account for the compensations that are happening. And even in something like a step press, it's like you can recognize that and you can try and fix it, but ultimately you're going to need more correctives. But you probably, being a trainer, you're probably able to say, well, I know this is happening. This just looks better when I look in the mirror and I do it like this in comparison. But how do we know that? It's because we have a reference point. It's because we're using the reference point of how I should look when I'm standing and when I'm walking and or when I'm running, right? That's why we use Usain Bolt as like one of the quintessential. And then some people will be like, well, he has a scoliosis and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, but you can't see that you can, but for the most part, your average person isn't like, oh yeah, I see the scoliosis in Usain. It's like, he looks fucking immaculate, right? So that's why it's like we're using that as the reference point.
Yeah, I mean,
I hope that's helpful.
so
I know I'm not able to go into like specifics in terms of like correctives. I'm just across the board.
No, please don't. Yeah, I mean, definitely people should do the 10-week course.
Justify it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Go ahead, Marcos.
So you've mentioned the course a few times now. Where do people get directed to that first and foremost? Because I feel like is it straight off the Instagram page, or is it something that like is elsewhere?
You can do it on the Functional Patterns. I think we actually do have it in our link tree too, but on the Functional Patterns Instagram, they definitely have it there, and then also functionalpatterns.com.
Got it. Okay. So
yeah,
clarify that for people, because I was like, let me go find that really quick. Like, where is it? How is it defined? Because you mentioned your specific location, which is like a satellite of like the bigger thing, correct?
Exactly.
Like, just to make sure people are.
So these different facilities, right? So we're essentially franchising.
The methodology. Gotcha. And so what's the cost of the 10-week course, out of curiosity?
I think it's like $270 or something like that, but they have sales all the time too. So
there's a bundle too.
Yeah, there's a bundle. Yeah. They do sales all the time. Like, just wait for the next holiday and they will do like a 20, 30, 40% off or something like that. And you can get it for a steal. Absolutely.
I mean, it's honestly at that price, I was like, even if you don't agree with the methodology, let's just say someone's like, I don't do functional. I'm like, you can still agree that someone put hundreds of hours editing, doing videos, explaining things that maybe you don't even like, it's worth this much, just, and you'll always have it, so it's like, it's very good stuff.
Totally. So the 10-week course is really where people should start. Even like, here's what I'll say, like if somebody has like intense chronic pain, there are times when like people just don't even know about myofascial release, and it's like they'll do that and be like, wow, I feel like 90% better already just doing that. And then on top of that, they learn a lot about their bodies. So in many instances, it depends on the case. Some people need one-on-one guidance just like right off the bat. But in many instances, people will be doing themselves a service by just like doing the 10-week course first, even before like coming to us or seeing a practitioner, for sure.
Awesome. I mean, so yeah, $27 a week effectively. If you catch it at a sale price, you might get it for $20 a week, right?
Exactly.
And you heard it here first. Yeah, he said wait till the holiday season if you're interested in this. So he's like, don't shoot the messenger. He's just trying to make sure people get into that place, because I think that was probably the one thing that obviously you keep reiterating is like you're not kind of delving into the IP in a sense, right? Like you want people to make sure they're going through the course, right, effectively, which we respect. We completely understand that. Like it's, I mean, can only imagine the amount of hours just to go through pre-planning into actual execution of creating the videos and the library and all the things that obviously go with like the education behind it. And people should acknowledge that. I mean, it's cheaper than getting a CrossFit cert. I'll tell you that much. So I mean, you know, if you're looking for other ways to like, again, look at like myofascial reliefs in a way that's probably, I mean, can you maybe kind of like talk to like, is it like a daily kind of thing, or is it, what does that like look like once you're inside for that
Yes,
10-week
so
program?
once
Because
a
I think
good
that could be
question.
helpful.
So there are like weekly modules, but then they have like follow-alongs. And then you also,
Okay.
the great thing of what I love about the 10-week course is that you also get to hear Nowdy kind of articulate the overall philosophy, etc., similar to like the similar to the course, similar to like being there in person with him when he does courses, or similar to the podcast is what I'm trying to say. The podcast that you guys
Hmm.
listen to, we won't go quite that deep philosophically, but there is an overarching philosophical like intro to the 10-week course.
Can I
So
ask real quick? Oh, go ahead, Marcos. Go ahead. You go first.
I really want to know like what were improvements or what were your metrics of like rating your improvement for yourself once you started versus before? Like how do you go about doing that now if it's like completely different?
Yes, no, that's completely fair. Because it was very easy before to just be like, I added 5 or 10 pounds to my bench press, or I look bigger, or whatever. Or maybe, you know, to be fair, someone might say, you know, I jump higher, or whatever the case may be.
Hmm.
But in many instances, even though, because those guys, they either plateau or they're trying to prevent injury, but then they inevitably get injured, or whatever the case may be. You know, not always. It just depends. But generally speaking, general pop, when you walk into a box gym, generally their measurements are body fat percentage, whether or not you've gained
Hmm.
muscle, whether or not, you know, you look different or lost weight or whatever the case may be, which is fine. You know, I mean, that's great. Losing weight is great. Gaining muscle is great. So I don't have any problems with those metrics. I still look at that metric for myself for sure. Like I want to make sure that I'm not gaining too much body fat by any means, making sure that my nutrition's, you know, good, you know, not getting too far off the mark. Sometimes I have to go back and, you know, log, you know what I'm saying? Things
Hmm.
like that. So what happened with me, I'll go into like the anecdotal aspect of it. This is just purely like me, what I
Yeah.
felt, you know what I'm saying? So really what my experience was this. I was listening to Nowdy talk, and he was being ultra intense. And he was like, it's not rocket science. One arm goes forward, one leg goes forward, blah, 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 blah. Just being ultra freaking intense. And I loved it. I loved it. So I was like, okay. I took it to a senior trainer and I was like, is what this guy's saying, does that, what do you think about this guy? And she was like, well, he's right. Technically, he's right. And I was like, okay, so then what are we doing? And then she kind of backpedaled and she was like, well, it's also exclusive and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, well, I get it. I understand. But at the same time, I've always kind of identified with that kind of like, if it's right, it's right. And whatever is in reality is in reality. And we all just have to deal with that. So I got the 10-week course, and there's a movement elimination protocol. And I was like, wow, I really have, and I'm a trainer at this time, right? So I literally it was like 4 weeks of not working out and just doing the myofascial release. And I was talking to another trainer that I also respected, and she was like, well, if you really want to know if it works, you got to do it the way that
Yeah.
they're telling you to do it. And I actually really respected her for that, because a lot of people would have been like, no, don't stop working out. Don't listen to these clowns, blah, 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 blah.
And first off, before you continue, that movement elimination sounds pretty much like a nutrition elimination that we,
Exactly.
some
Yes.
of us coaches would do with
Yes.
some people. So yeah,
Yes.
anyways.
Totally. Yes. We say that all the time. 100%. We say it's like, you know, of course, when people talk about doing it for nutrition, it's like, yeah, makes sense. Then we talk about movement, and it's like people have a big problem.
I feel like there's some anxiety with that because like I'm like, well, I have a plan,
Yeah.
and I know I did your questionnaire or something like that because I live close to San Mark. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
movement elimination plan. Like I'm like, ah, Yeah, I'll just say yes. I don't know if I'm gonna eliminate. I might do some things, but there's like some anxiety about like I guess like if you're in like such a movement person, if you train a lot,
Yes.
like you're like, no, I'm doing my program. No, you got to follow something. You're right. You got to follow something just to
Yeah,
see if it works.
you have to give it a chance. And you have to, and listen, in some instances it can be a lot longer than that. It depends on the person. But listen, there are some people where I'm like, listen, bro, we're going to do 4 or 6 weeks of this, and then you can go test out your stuff with a game of basketball or doing like FP dynamics. It's almost like some of our group classes is basically FP CrossFit, where it's like, okay, we're going to do it's like high intensity interval, and it's almost like a Tabata or whatever the case may be. There's like a workout of the day, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
it's very intense. So I was like, so don't get me wrong. It depends on the situation. You can work very hard with FP. And so where people are sweating and like really that same kind of endorphin rush where everybody claps after class because it was just so intense and we all did it together and blah blah blah, all that corny stuff. You know what I'm saying? We can do that. We can do that. So it's like then the other aspect of it is though the movement elimination protocol. It's like some people have no business doing what they're doing. And I know that it's like, well, who are you to say? It's like, well, it's just like the nutrition. It's like you can continually eat what you're eating now if you want
Mm-hmm.
to, be SHITing yourself, for the next however long. If you're okay with the symptoms that you have, then don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? But if you're continually experiencing this result with what you're doing, then you owe it to yourself to say, if I stop, what happens? And I totally get what you're saying, Seamus. You completely nail on the head. That's what some people. What happens is people end up with chronic pain, and then they're the ones that are like, "I'll do anything. I will stop what I'm doing. It's a 5 on the form. Like, please, Jesus, just solve my problem." And then you have people that come in that are either just curious about it or they're in some pain, but they're willing to still kind of deal with it. And they'll be like a 3 or a 1, or they're like, I really don't want to give up what I'm doing. And then it'll be this. It'll be like, I'm doing cycling, yoga, physical therapy, stretch therapy, CrossFit, blah, blah, weightlifting, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, you have so
It just
many.
seems, yeah, it seems like high maintenance just to figure out like one problem. Like if let's say you're like for me, like let's say I'm like dealing with that glute issue or whatever, and it's like, yeah, I'm doing squats on this day, I'm training on this day.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll delve into this because there's so many training modalities. I wonder how you guys address this, but it's like, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and then I go see a physical therapist and I do mobility class. It's like you're doing like 6 things just to like, you're kind of all over. And I'm like, I've done that. I've been all over. So my question for you is like, for example, like obviously Marcos and I look at like VO2 max, and VO2 max is like a great correlative for health.
Sure.
Or there's these. It sounds like to me, are you guys more like it just sounds like, I don't know, maybe it's just right now how it looks like on social media, is it like addressing dysfunction and pain? Do you guys also address like just people that are wanting to perform way higher as well, but not from a pain perspective? Or like how do you address like VO2, or how do you address like these other aspects of the fitness industry? Because there's so many aspects of the fitness industry that they all meld into some soup, you know what I'm saying?
Totally. And I understand with VO2 max, and people talk about how VO2 max is like an ultimate predictor of all-cause mortality. So I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
I can get on board with that. But here's the thing. Can someone worry about VO2 max if they can't run well? Then their VO2 max is not going to be something that you're going. Because here's the thing. Let's say they can't run well, but they can bike. Okay, fine. But then what you're doing is when you have them bike, what's the problems from a mechanical perspective of them doing that continuous biking? Is the trade-off of the VO2 max worth it if they end up in pain? Because I'll tell you, at some point, you're going to hit a wall. And then at some point, if they end up in pain, they can't bike anyway. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing. It's like the VO2 max, the idea is when you get somebody, I can fatigue people and have them break a sweat in standing positions. right? In positions that, now I'm not saying I am working their VO2 max to a certain extent. It depends on the individual, right? It depends on how deconditioned they are, whatever the case may be. I'm not saying that I'm making this huge dent into their VO2 max, but by the time I get them doing dynamics, you better believe I am. Right? If I'm able to have them do dynamic movement, some of the stuff that you've seen on Instagram. I mean, you guys have seen the Kyle Dake training montage, yeah?
I
Kyle
mean,
Dake's
no, but probably Seamus.
I
Yeah.
mean, no, like when Kyle Dake was, dude, there was a game changer. I don't know what happened, but obviously I watched it. It was insane because Jordan Burroughs, was blast doubling people for like the longest time, looked unstoppable. Even his time with Dake, David Taylor, like these guys are the creme de la creme. And then Jordan was still killing it. And then what happened was like Kyle Dake came in one year, dude. It was like way different. He was moving bouncy. He was moving fast. He didn't look stuck, is what I would like to say. He didn't look stuck in the mud. And then his technique just looked effortless. And then he just walked through. I don't like to say this because like Jordan is like a god amongst men, but he walked through him one year, and I was just like, "What the fuck happened?" And then that video came out, and I was like, "Oh, this is legit stuff." But it again in my filter when I was looking through that, I was like, "I don't know how to apply this because obviously it's his thing." But go ahead.
Sure. So that's the thing. It's like the corrective work enables you to achieve those VO2 max levels. Here's what I'll say. So this is something that I feel like a lot of people, if they're really intellectually honest about it, just the other day, there was somebody that doesn't do functional patterns, and we were playing a game of basketball, and he had previously done a bunch of squatting, but then he had back pain, so he stopped. He's just somebody who plays with us. We don't really talk to him about what we do or whatever. He just came to that conclusion on his own. And we were playing a game he hadn't been in a while, and he was like, man, all this treadmill running isn't doing shit. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Because then you go and play a game of basketball, and it's a completely different freaking ball game, right? So that's the thing. The more that he could have been doing high intensity sprints, and it still would have been different from what he would be doing on the basketball court. Even though sprinting would have probably been much closer than like trying to do the whole idea of there's like a base, building your aerobic base is what they call it, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to build an aerobic base, and then it's going to be anaerobic, and then I can sprint or whatever the case may be. It's not necessary. You can do that. You can kind of progress somebody that way with something like functional patterns, but more than likely, if you really work on somebody's mechanics and they're able to start like what they're able to tolerate something like running, then they're going to be able to tolerate ballistics better. And that's the whole thing with like even Tom Myers, right? There's this interview with Tom Myers that Functional Patterns did. I think it's still on YouTube. And he's talking about how when you train fascia, it's not done at yogic speeds. It's done at ballistic, bouncy, plyometric speeds. So we don't take people through plyometrics right off the bat, but then we take them through the ballistics that's going to get them there over a period of time. And then by the time they're able to do that, then they're going to be working their VO2 max.
Yeah,
So
you mentioned in the beginning, really, like even at the professional athlete level, that you strip them down to like the most regressed version of anything.
Totally.
And it made me think of like my wife in PT with like pelvic floor issues. And she's like, I literally did a session where I just spent the whole time working on how to breathe, and I can't breathe right. And I was like, you probably suck at breathing then, and then learning how to create just the pressure in appropriate places so that she can get back to doing the stuff that she likes to actually do.
Yeah.
Right. So I think when you mentioned that, it immediately put me to that thought. And sometimes it's good to almost go and feel like a beginner at something again, right? So I don't know why more people wouldn't be, even if they don't agree with it, like be more open to just like, hey, it's 10 weeks of my life to do something, just to like go through the trials and tribulations of it. Like,
Totally.
I don't know. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little skeptical myself though, because I'm like, dude, 4 weeks to just do myofascial release does not sound like anything that would make me want to wake up in the morning. Like that would be so hard for me to like invest in. I'm not gonna lie.
Sure. And I understand that. And listen, it's like, and even the rest of it, people are like, well, I had a consult call with a guy that was like, I can't imagine just waking up every day and not getting after it. It's like, well, You have to think about it this way. You're consolidating in order so that way you can continually get after it. You know what I mean? You're 31, so it's a little bit different. This guy was in his 50s, and his mobility routine is getting longer and longer and longer and longer. It's like, well, eventually, brother, you have to consider
Mm-hmm.
what, even though you feel good right after the fact, what are you doing when you put in those inputs again and again and again and again? And that's why you see when we talk about stretching, one thing I say on every podcast, if there was one thing that, if you want me to give you some IP, I'll tell you one thing. If there was one thing as a takeaway from any podcast that I ever do, and this will be probably the most polarizing thing I say, is don't stretch. Stretching is the real pandemic, no doubt about it. Don't do yoga. Do not stretch. I know, I get that. You're talking to a guy who's done a lot of stretching. I used to
Yeah.
stretch nonstop, but then I started to do
Would you say like loaded stretching? Like loaded stretching either? Not to that out.
That's what we're doing.
Depends. Like for example, like Jefferson curls, like
No,
eccentrics on.
no,
You
Jefferson.
don't like those?
Man, that destroyed me. That's how I dislocated my
Ooh.
shoulder, is through Jefferson.
Oh what?
You're over length, and I even like loaded that crazy. But you're giving your shoulder joint and all these, like, you're giving it the signal to continually just let go, let go, let go, let go, let go. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
And I'm not even saying that that's completely inappropriate. Like, I mean, the way that they're doing it is completely inappropriate. You do not want to do that passively with gravity like that. That's the key. You don't want to do it passive gravity. You want to do it with agonist antagonist relevant to gait in ratio with like gait mechanics, right? There's a certain, like, for example, I take somebody through a single leg stance. There's a certain amount of knee flexion, a certain amount of hip flexion, a certain amount of dorsiflexion, right? There is a certain amount positionally relative to them and their structure that makes their glute fire, right? Or whatever it is, okay? Or whatever I'm trying to work. And outside the realm of that, if I go too far, then like, let's say, like, okay, you're talking about a Jefferson curl, we're talking about toe touch, right? I go down and touch my toes or whatever the case may be. I'm giving them the wrong input relative to what they actually need, right? Because they need an overall tensegrity. And if I am starting to over lengthen aspects of that, then I end up with a faulty structure. So when I flex my bicep, my tricep stretches, and vice versa, right? Now think about that in terms of myofascial chains, right? There's a certain amount of anterior oblique sling, like when you're doing your step press, that's what you're noticing is dysfunctions in AOS, POS, right? But it's not just happening in your shoulder joint. It's not just happening in your hip joint. It's happening throughout your entire chain, right?
Yeah, the interior, the posterior chain. Yeah.
Like a Jefferson curl, you're messing up that relationship between, like, for example, front line, back line, amongst other things.
Yeah. I have a question for you real quick. I know we're on this rant, but there was another person. I don't know if you've ever delved into this. Do you know Josh Henkin of Dynamic Variable Resistance Training, the guy that created Ultimate Sandbag?
I don't, but I've heard of Ultimate. I don't know him, but I've heard of Ultimate Sandbag.
So 10 years ago, like kind of delving into like the myofascial stuff, he was getting into that myofascial stuff. And he was one of the guys, and this is before I heard of Nadi, but they said the same thing. And like they came to the same conclusion from two different aspects. He's like, the future of training is myofascial sling training. Myofascial sling training.
Yeah.
And it's just going to take a while. It's going to take a while for people to figure that out. It's going to take a while for... And but he utilizes sandbags as devices. I know maybe you said this in a different pod, like you don't necessarily use sandbags, but in terms of the movement mechanics, it looks similar to like what you guys are doing in a sense of like there's always step, there's always a rotational, there's always like a antagonist, all these things. So, but anyways, continue on in terms of like when it comes to the future of that, do you see with the functional patterns, not just as like a methodology in there, but people coming into it a little bit more outside of pain? Do you think more people will accept it as like just part of their routines, like they can adapt it to their routines outside of just like, oh, I'm doing pain?
Sure. Okay, so yes, that's a good question actually, because what we typically what gives us our differential advantage is that people will try everything. And when they've tried everything else and then that doesn't work anymore, then they'll finally say, all right, I got to give this a shot because it's my last chance. But even beyond that, like for me, I hadn't really reached that point yet, to be fair. So, like, once
Yeah.
again, just hopping back to my experience and then I'll expand more. But I was doing the 10-week course and I had been doing the myofascial release. And actually, 2 weeks in, I cheated. And I was like, oh, my buddy wants to do some boxing. And that sounds fun. And I hadn't really done that much of it. So but I had previously a little. And so I was doing the myofascial release and then we did some boxing and I felt really good. I was like, whoa, I don't feel like sore or stiff or like I'm rotating better. I'm hitting harder. I was like, oh, my buddy was like, what have you been doing? I'm like, just myofascial release. I've literally been doing nothing but rolling. And to be fair, if you have somebody with a little bit of athletic potential and you have them do nothing for 2 weeks and then all of a sudden have them do their sport, they might feel pretty good doing it, right? Because they're well rested or whatever the case may be. But basically, that's when I started to recognize, hey, if I'm not doing this like heavy longitudinal load, I feel more athletic. And even though I had a certain level of athletic potential, my dad was actually like a sports phenom. He could play like any sport. Like he could, like in his early 60s now, he can play like a game of basketball and like score and everything. But so I have that genetic potential, but I just never got into it. I was only ever into like lifting and stuff like that, super introverted, and didn't want to deal with like team sports. I thought everybody was just a bunch of jerks, and I didn't want to deal with that. So what I ended up doing was I was like, okay, that's cool. But then I started to notice, like, then I started doing Muay Thai and I was just doing FP. And even my coach was like, you need to stretch and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not stretching. And he was like, okay, well, we'll see how you do. And then I ended up doing super well. Like I said, when you coach people that are approaching their 30s, in many instances, they don't get that much better at things that are pretty difficult. Like they might get better. Like I'm not saying that a squat or a deadlift can't be difficult, especially by the time you get to these insane loads. But for the most part, right, when you go into a deadlift, your feet got to be in the right position. You bend over, make sure your back's flat, brace, grip, pick it up. You know what I'm saying? For the most part. Like there's going to be technique and stuff like that, whatever the case may be. But you'd have a much harder time having somebody that's never really done martial arts and actually progressively getting them to hit with like way more power, way more to where they actually look like an athlete where before they were a deconditioned individual. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I was discovering was happening with me. So I was like, oh man, now I'm actually able to move well and I'm able to understand weight transfer. And I'm able to bounce off these ideas of how to move well with other people that have the same reference point. And now I'm just continually getting better, even though now by this point I'm approaching 40. I just turned 36 this past year. So it's like, well, now I'm getting better every single year. It's like, man, and then like I said, I've had people that play professional sports that come in and are finally saying, and it really comes down to the athletes. The athletes have to say, hey, this stuff is beating me up. This preseason stuff, it's just making me stiff. I don't feel that much difference in power or strength or whatever the case may be. I need to be running hard. I need to be jumping. I need to be doing sport-specific stuff. And that is better off for me. And we've had people do that. So I think that there will be more so people that are like, I want to be the healthiest human that I can be. And I think that functional patterns is the way to do that. And we're getting that more and more.
Yeah. Seems like it. Yeah.
Sorry if that was super long-winded.
No, it's a good one. Marcus, you got anything?
It's weird. So like, as I thought about this more, like, I think I used to identify being more in tune with my own athleticism, only to now want like the vanity angle to be a bit more. So how do you integrate this particular practice to also get you like the hypertrophy benefits that you might be going after?
Totally. that's usually the first thing that people talk about, which I totally understand. But I guarantee
Yeah.
you, Marcos, I don't know your build exactly just based off of like looking through the screen, but I can tell you right now, more than likely, you probably wouldn't even lose much muscle mass at all if you transferred completely to functional patterns. Like, I know that might be hard to believe, but like some people will be like, yeah, but he built his based weightlifting or whatever the case may be. I mean, Kyle Dake actually put on about 10 pounds of muscle when he started doing functional patterns as opposed to doing weightlifting, etc. And maybe part of that too is like, he's wrestling. So, wrestling,
Hmm.
think about the level of time under tension that you're getting with something.
Yeah.
You know what
I
I'm
mean,
saying?
I followed Dake's like career intensively, like when he was doing strength and conditioning back in Cornell and like all this, and I was like doing those programs and like, and then when he did his like the functional patterns, I was like, he didn't touch a single weight in that way, squat, bench, deadlift, like the usual strength and conditioning. Um, I mean, for me myself, like the reason why I feel like functional patterns is attractive and I admire it is also the fact that like I also think not everyone necessarily wants to get bigger, faster, stronger, utilizing movements that I still to this day, I mean, I still argue with like NSCA, CSCS, strength and conditioning coaches to try to figure out like what is a certain movement actually doing in terms of its translation to a sport. For example, like we had years ago when I was in the strength and conditioning room, North Carolina's head strength and conditioning coach, Bob Alejo, 30 years, winningest coach in North Carolina for basketball, comes in and takes over our program. Our whole staff gets fired. I'm like one of the guys on the chopping block getting out of there. And in the testing, he goes, "Oh yeah, we don't do cleans anymore." And I'm like, "Why won't you do cleans?" And like at this time, I'm like all about the power lifts, like Olympic lifts. Like we do cleans, we do all this stuff. He's like, "No, we only do deadlifts. We only do deadlifts for our testing." And I'm like, "Why?" And for example, he said, "Look at all these studies. All these studies, for example, just showed that the deadlift still correlated to all these potentials for like bouncing or whatever.
I see.
And then like they don't need to do the clean because it's like a technical thing that they're adding onto their basketball routine.
I
All
see.
this yada yada yada. But then also just my point to functional patterns is like I still struggle with like does lifting more per se then translate to a sport, right? Like or doing squat, bench, and deadlift because I got hurt. Like my shoulders got hurt because I know like I was just trying to bench more and like I was like
Yeah.
I don't know how that helps. Like I'd rather do for my shoulder. Like I like the functional, things like that, and I still press. I do all those things, but I noticed I was like I don't think I needed to bench to be a better wrestler or jiu-jitsu guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, where's the actual translation sometimes? And I love the fact that like you're saying that about like Kyle Dake. Like, hey, he was still able to wrestle even better, still put on muscle, which I know Marcus's question is about like aesthetics. Most people think are aesthetics, right?
Completely valid question. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's completely fine because I understand that because a lot of times people would be like, "Oh, well, functional patterns they all look like track athletes." I'm like, well, first of all, I'm happy to look
They
like
look
a
good.
track athlete because
They look good.
I take that as a compliment. I think track athletes look great. But then also, I think one aspect of it that I'm not trying to use this as a cop out because once again, there is definitely a time and place for adding on muscle for sure. I would say that
Hmm.
you don't want to add muscle onto like depending on how severe a person's scoliosis is. I could still like add muscle to their frame, but I wouldn't want to do that too early in the process. And if somebody's really twisted up, it could take a while to untwist them. But I will tell you, they will probably add on muscle in the process. And although they may have, if they have too much, if they've done a lot of lifting and they're in a lot of pain, then they probably need to lose muscle first because all of that muscle is oriented in these directions that's just cranking them. You know what I'm saying? And causing major amounts of pain. So some people might have a problem with that, but they just have to, see what they're willing to deal with. But you give me a person who hasn't done much lifting, and then it's like, okay, we've worked on your structure quite a bit. You will gain some. First, will be kind of three-dimensional motion. You will gain some muscle because you can load that. But then we can load it even more. I can take someone into like a hypertrophy phase. I have definitely
I love that.
since from losing my initial like mass from lifting, I definitely got smaller after like working on functional patterns strictly before I had done I was never that big, by the way. So to be fair, lifting also doesn't get everybody jacked, because otherwise we would all look jacked. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to the aesthetic, I totally understand the question, but at the same time, most people look like crap. You know what I'm saying? It's typically the
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, because like I come from like transformation gyms, like, you know, like gyms that are like, oh yeah, just fat loss, they do like 6 weeks, you know, fit in 42, they do all these things. My question is, obviously you guys are coming at it from like a movement perspective,
Sure.
pain, performance, translating that to just day-to-day doing your 10-week course. You know, most of the problems that Marcus and I deal with, and I think the Ozempification of the world, right, is that how do you deal with that when when you're speaking with someone, if they're like trying to train, like how do you guys address, like, look, like that's a different, I mean, they're the same but also different, because it's like you guys are training movement, but it's like, well, I want to lose body fat.
Totally.
And obviously that's a lot of nutrition, lifestyle too, but
sure.
how do you guys address that?
Sure. Well, listen, if you want to lose body fat, what's the main thing? You eat less, for the most part, like, of course, like cardio, et cetera, there's a stimulation of your metabolism or whatever the case may be. But we'll even talk to people about that, because there'll be people come in and like, it's really hard for us to create core pressure unless you lose some visceral fat. You know what I'm saying? And like, that can be extremely important, even in regards to changing your structure, even when it comes to changing your movement. That's still an important aspect of it. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying it's that simple. Obviously, there are behavioral aspects. I'm not trying to make it seem like it's that easy, because it's not. But the mechanism is that, or there are people from the Jack Cruz camp, which, respect to all that, the circadian health, we talk about that too, who is like, it's not as simple as calories in and calories out. And there's truth to that too. But for the most part, you will do, that stuff is relevant. You will do better with the circadian rhythm, and like, okay, I'm going to eat more earlier in the day and then less later in the day. Sunlight has a effect on my biology, and it has to do with my appetite and all that stuff too. Like, all that is relevant for sure. But generally speaking, most people need to eat less. They need to keep an eye on their diet. Maybe they need to track calories for a couple weeks, stuff like that. And then as their structure improves, people look significantly better, because they come in with what we call Skeletor mechanics, which is where it's like, okay, this rib's here and they're super like sunken and they're pale and they're just like, well, no wonder this person is in pain. So then all of a sudden they've gotten sun, they've been outside more, they look quote unquote puffier in a good way, right? They look more resilient. They're what we call it, we say their tissue looks hydrated. They're not super dried out, because you can have guys that are jacked but look terrible. You know what I'm saying? They look super dried out. They look super stiff. They have these big muscles, but then you look at their posterior side and their back's just absolutely smashed. Their scaps are sinking way down and pushed back. You know what I'm saying? So it's still, there's some nuance there when it comes to hypertrophy. And then the last thing I'll say about this is, like, we were just on the Mark Bell podcast. I mean, we have to admit that some of that audience might have a little bit of body dysmorphia because of steroids, the bodybuilding. You see what there's a certain amount of muscle that's appropriate. And then there's a certain amount of muscle that's
you're speaking to my body dysmorphic tendencies right now. You're speaking to my body dysmorphic tendencies. It's speaking.
I idolized Ronnie Coleman growing up. You know what I'm saying? I totally idolized him, and that was that was body dysmorphia when I look back on it. Like pressuring myself, and a lot of my friends were big. They were really into weightlifting. Spruce Creek was like the weightlifting like champions. And there was all sorts of steroid abuse at a very young age, like all that stuff. So it's like we have to, it's not a cop out. We have to at least recognize that, like, how much muscle is really appropriate and is going to be functional for your average person.
Well, they brought that up in your podcast about the person they had on previously that said that there's a particular ratio of potential muscle to bone, right?
Right.
And I think that that's a fair comparison too, is like, what is truly the epigenetic potential of an individual based off of, what, the cards were dealt. We can't control those things. My mom's Italian, my dad's Puerto Rican, you know what I mean? Like that
Sure.
just so happen to have a kid, you know what I mean? Like, and you're right, like we do idolize particular, like for me it was like Schwarzenegger, like I don't know why, but like I think I like the accent. My dad was always watching, freaking action movies when I was a kid, and I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
like, and even then, like now he's like, you look at that build, which on camera for those 80s and 90s movies where he's like chiseled, right? He's like not even, probably like not even in the second or third call out. Like it's crazy, like how much this image has inflated. Like it's
Sure.
crazy.
Sure.
But I do have a question though, because you mentioned like as you were building, as you were going through your old phase of self, like what was like kind of your peak weight? What'd you get down to? What do you kind of sit at now? So like the audience just kind
Sure.
of has some like perspective there.
Sure. That's a good question. I will say, running a business has definitely like taken its toll on my
Hmm.
goals for sure. And I'm not
Yeah.
trying to be like, oh, I feel good about my
Phases.
overall performance. I feel like I look good. Do I look like, you know, my absolute peak? I don't think so. I think that I still have quite a ways to go. What that looks like is going to morph a little bit. I would say that I like my lowest since high school has probably been about 155. That's when it's like I'm doing keto and I'm like lost a
Hmm.
bunch of water weight, definitely like visible abdominals, that kind of thing. And then I will ramp up, all the way up to almost one. I don't anymore, but at one point when I was here in Santa Monica, I got all the way up to about 180. And I was like, okay, I
Hmm.
definitely gained some muscle, but I have more body fat than I should. So I was like, okay,
Hmm.
well, but I'm somebody who never really gets heavy. I've always been a thinner guy most of my life, So it would be very
Hmm.
hard for me to be like, oh yeah, Mike's, really let himself go. You know what I'm saying? Like that's pretty
Yeah.
much. I don't think I could eat enough to make that happen. But I probably my ultimate goal probably would be to I'm about 170-ish right now. I maybe get up to about 175 and then I don't let myself go beyond that because then I know I'm gaining too much body fat. But my goal would be to be at a solid like 168, 170 and have a fairly low body fat percentage. And I think that my structure would be able to handle that and that I would
Hmm.
be able to move pretty well with that. You know what I mean? That's what I've actually just really discovered that recently where I'm like, yeah, if I'm at about 170 and I got a little bit more muscle, if I could gain just a little bit more muscle and lose a little bit more body fat, I'm in a pretty good place. I look like I'm in shape. You wouldn't be like,
Yeah.
yeah, whoa, this guy's a professional athlete, but you would be like, he's definitely in shape. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're cruising around the streets of Santa Monica, no one's gonna say like this guy doesn't belong with his shirt off kind of thing. Like that's, I think, where
Exactly. Yeah,
most of us
exactly.
want to be at, right?
Right.
But so then, how tall are you? Out of curiosity?
I'm about 5'10".
5'10". Okay. Yeah, we have. I mean, you and I have a big discrepancy of weight at a
All,
similar height.
all three of us have a similar height. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm the
yeah, we're
same
all
weight as
like,
Michael. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, shoot, like the lowest I got to in a post high school era was like 185. And my wife saw a photo of me and she's like, your head is too big for your fucking body. So, so she's like, I need you at like a 205 mark. And I'm like 195, 196 right now. And she's like, you need to put on 10 more pounds again. So
Wow.
it's funny though, because like again, like the visual interpretation and things that are, again, like I'm sure, like you're saying, like that 170, whatever that percentage body fat is, where
Sure.
you feel
Sure.
good. Like again, you want it to translate over to these different ball sports that you do play. You know what I mean? And like to a degree, like that was part of my journey in the last quarter to lose. From I was like about 230
Sure.
at the beginning of this year, and now I'm like at 196, right? But the goal with that was like I need to feel a little bit better
Yeah.
to go do activities with my son, and then now I'm like, I mean, I kick a ball around for a little bit and my hips feel some type of way. My glutes are not firing appropriately. And then I'm like, I might need to revamp the training. And so when Seamus was like, hey, I got someone that's gonna have an interesting conversation that maybe
Sure.
will impact our training for a little bit. And I was like, I'm all for it because like the more you know, the more you test, the more you can like kind of again like you can I think you can grab from individuals and kind of build, the ultimate you,
Sure.
and I'm all about that for sure.
Cool. And I think I would say that you probably definitely have a genetic potential for building muscle then in that case, because you said we're similar height.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
then
I'm 5'10", I'm like 5'10" and a half.
sure, sure, sure. So then even then it's like when I was lifting, I never got past 180. Never. Not even close. And I was lifting all the
Jeez.
time. You know what I'm saying? So
But
that's
how
what I'm
much? But how
saying
much
is
was that? How much was that food though? Like you mentioned, like you've never been maybe a super hungry individual that has like a roaring appetite, to feed enough to
well,
like
no, I
actually
mean
grow. Do you feel like
it was
that?
it was mostly my metabolism. I could actually eat quite a bit. And that was
Okay.
actually that's a good question. That's actually a good point because that was actually the first thing that messed me up that ended up taking me to functional patterns. And there's a bunch of different things you could say about it. I'm not saying I was doing it perfect by any means, but I was eating like 3,500 calories a day or so or something like that, and I was trying to gain more muscle, and I got up to about 180, but then I started to feel a little bit inflamed, and then I went to go do a deadlift, and I threw my
Mm,
back and it was destroyed it. It destroyed
mm.
it. And I was out for like 3 months, and that's when I started doing research. I almost fainted. I literally had to lay on the ground and be like, okay, whoa, I really have
Jeez.
myself up. Yeah, 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 yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah,
and
it's
once
crazy. I
just
wanted
just
to ask you, Mike, on like the functional pattern stuff, like um one of our performance health coaches, we're doing a recording with him later today too, was I love the gait, the sprint, the throw, and some of your training. Where does like carries and sled work go into like that? Do you guys practice some of that? Is that part of the system, or is that like adjunct?
it can be. It can be. Like even with some of the sandbag stuff, like I've played around with some sandbag stuff. Like there's a way that you could do like sandbag work, and like I know Kyle and Nowdy had played around with like the super heavy Atlas stones. So that kind of those lifting mechanics we still do for sure.
Okay.
And even when I did the Mark Bell podcast, they had all these sandbags around, and like there was like they would range from like 200 to 300 pounds, and like I was able to do a 225-pound bag lift and just like pick it up, so
Yeah.
and listen, not that that's like saying much. I know there's guys that do insane bag lifts or whatever, but what it was just the fact that like, hey, this is 225 pounds, probably going to be way heavier than most of the things that I'm going to encounter, you know what I mean, like in my daily life for the most
Yeah.
part. And I can
Hmm.
just bend over and pick it up, and I could pick it up a bunch of times. I could probably done 250 or whatever the case may be. So it was like, and there was no chance of me throwing my back out or anything. So, and listen,
Yeah.
that's not to say like, oh, okay, I can do that, so now functional patterns has like earned its spot, but it was just the idea of like, I don't train that, but I could still do it if I needed to. That's kind of like the argument when we would talk about the deep squat. We'd be like, well, you don't want a deep squat because same reason you wouldn't want to do a Jefferson curl, because your gravity's doing the work for you. So then that's going to affect your hips and the way that your femurs interact with your hips, etc., and lower back. And people would be like, well, then how do how would have humans had taken a poop? You know what I'm saying? Like back in the day, they would have had the deep squat, blah blah blah. Was always the big argument. And I'd be like, well, I mean, I could deep squat right now. But I don't ever practice the deep squat. But when I'm going through gait, there's a certain amount of hip flexion and extension that I'm having to go through, and that's transferring over into my mobility. So you don't necessarily like somebody who can sprint extremely well probably isn't going to have that much of a problem going down into a deep squat, or even like doing a pull up, or even like carrying something heavy overall. Because I
Yeah.
think people were talking about Ensema, talking about like his like family in Africa will still have to carry these like things, right? It's like, well, yeah, but I mean, they're doing it without barbell back squatting. It's like they're not training carrying, and they're able to do it. So then why are you saying that this is like a necessary thing to train per se? So carrying
Oh, okay. So it's
part of it,
I see what you're saying.
but it's
Yeah.
it's not a priority. It's not something that I'm going to say, okay, do this every other day. There are going to be things that we're doing that's going to say, hey, this is going to carry over into if you need to lift something heavy.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Like when Naughty created the system, when you guys were creating the system, you're doing movements that are approaching gait throwing and sprinting, jumping, and then these things, you're still going to be able to go do them. You're still going to be able to go do this
Sure.
other stuff if you want to go do this other stuff.
Sure.
No, that makes sense. That's an understandable point of view. Yeah.
I would say it's just something that you will be able to do if you have to do it, as opposed to
That makes sense.
I'm going to make it a priority in my training and that's going to make me better. Because if you're going to take a sandbag and walk with it for like a long distance, there are going to be compensations. And like if for example, in Seamus' family, and not, I'm sure he wouldn't take offense to this. I think we're just having a conversation, but I'm sure if they didn't have to do it, they wouldn't. You know what I'm saying? Like if they didn't
That makes sense.
have to
Yeah.
carry it, you know what I mean? So it's like if I don't have to carry this heavy thing a long distance, right? We have better ways to do that now. That's the idea.
Yeah. Technology.
Exactly. Or even if I was like rucking or something like that, I was like, I could totally do it. I could totally do it, and I could make it more sustainable. There's like postural things that I can do to consider to make that more sustainable if I had to do it. But over a long period of time, I don't know if I train it unless I absolutely had to. And then I would mostly just be mitigating damage rather than like, oh, this is making me better. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
It makes me want to almost like, okay, like you're saying, if I do this as my only methodology of training and then go try to do a CrossFit competition, how would I fare relative to me when I've been doing what I've been doing currently, which is not CrossFit at all, signing up for a competition and going for it? Because that would be, to me, like I had a period where I spent like 8 weeks prepping, so I did more conditioning and more sports specific stuff, right? Like i.e. the movements that would be there, right? Like you're saying here in this scenario.
Sure.
And I did a little bit better, or like perceptively I felt better, right? Like I felt used to the stimulus, right?
Totally.
But you're saying if I'm doing FP, that I theoretically should be able to go into that and like maybe feel better than quote me in my like bodybuilding phases right now, which would be,
well,
I guess.
Okay. Here's what I'll say. So I'm going to go back a little bit. One, Seamus, you were talking about the studies that the strength and conditioning coach was talking about.
Yeah, we were just talking about like why he was taking out really big technical moves to just help with like keeping things across the board.
He's saying these studies show that the people who have the highest 1 rep max deadlifts and back squats typically sprint the fastest or jump the highest, right? There's a correlative.
Yeah, there was like a correlative, and there wasn't really much correlative on like why should we teach a clean when I could just do this one? It's an easy technique to teach. And all
they're thinking keep it simple, right? And I get it, sure, whatever. But it's just I get it, but it's a very reductionist way to think about it. It's not being scientific. It is too simple. And they're saying, okay, well, it's reductionistic, really. So he's like, all right, well, then why don't we just do deadlifts? But here's the thing. You have to say, is it the fastest sprinters that can deadlift the most, or is the people that can deadlift the most that are the fastest sprinters? That's the problem. So, right. Here's what I'll say. Are the people who can squat 800 pounds the fastest sprinters? I don't think so. I'm not sure. I mean, that's not what I see, because otherwise we'd see it's like Usain Bolt definitely was not squatting 800 pounds, right? So then if that's the case, clearly there's a limitation on the progressive overload. Isn't that worth investigating? You know what I'm saying? Like if at some point the progressive overload just is compounding asymmetries, then we owe it to ourselves to find another way. So then, back to what you were talking about, Marcos. I would be able to make you a better CrossFitter. Like if you were training with me, but you would probably still have to practice CrossFit. Because what I'm saying is like something like carrying a sandbag or whatever the case may be. At the very least, there's like when you go to pick up a sandbag, that's very different from like a barbell, from like a clean or a snatch, right? There are some, I'll say like, yes, you're kind of yanking it up to you, whatever. There's like, you can do it explosively or whatever. But generally speaking, the physics of that are very different from a barbell. So with something like CrossFit, that's when we finally say, okay, I'm not sure how functional this is. There are things that are more functional and less functional. So you would have to keep doing, I could probably make you better at CrossFit, but you would still have to practice CrossFit because of like the said principle. If I'm training gait and whatever the case may be, I could get stronger at picking up objects in a very non-linear way, right? But I probably won't necessarily get better at like deadlifting, or like the better that I get at something like a clean or whatever the case may be, in many instances, it will actually end up deconditioning my gait. So it depends. It depends. It's hard to say. It depends. It's also dependent on the individual and their genetic potential. So it's like, so that's why it's like eventually when you take somebody through enough of the CrossFit and they're not sprinting, or they're able to sprint a certain amount and they end up going kind of the CrossFit route, eventually they're not going to be able to sprint without throwing something out anymore, or the sprint performance starts to go down. There are activities that the better you get at those activities, the worse that your gait will get over a long period of time.
It makes a lot of sense, because the argument there is like your movement efficiency. Marcus, remember that conversation we had with Zach, your buddy Zach? That movement efficiency is so good that it's like it's your recoverability in that short time and that sport specific stuff. You can get into it. So now you're looking at aerobic alactic capacities, because now you're so efficient. You're not necessarily looking at your fitness as the determinant factor of, oh, I can do the sport or not. It's like your movement efficiency, which I think if Marcus is movement efficiency with some FP and then he goes back into there, it's like, okay, now we're tapping into the deep, fitness reservoirs if he wants to, but he doesn't necessarily need to because he's conditioned his movement skills so well. I think that makes a lot of sense from like a movement standpoint. You don't have to rely on blasting your aerobic capacity or doing all this other stuff. You're like, my movement is just so well that like, I'm so good, I'm so skilled that like I move well. I don't need to have such a big fitness factor. I'll use an example. Like, for example, in jiu-jitsu, one of my best mentors, one of the best things he ever said to me when I was doing jiu-jitsu, Mike, is he goes, Seamus, you're so fit, but look at you, you're breathing so hard. And this is a jiu-jitsu match. This is not anything crazy. And it's like, it's not that you're not fit. It's just you're not efficient. You're not effective. And I think that's like the question. I know like GSP from UFC talks about that. He's like, his strength and conditioning wasn't necessarily like, do I need to be more fit? I need to be more efficient. And that means to that specific thing. And for me, that efficiency was coming from technique, slowing things down and breathing better. And the next roll I did that, and I had a more active quote unquote role, but I wasn't breathing hard and I wasn't making mistakes. So it's a weird dichotomy when you look at high peak performance like that. So I appreciate your input there, Mike.
That's the thing about VO2 max, because people ask me that question. I'm like, I mean, I'm sure that you would have a pretty great VO2 max if we put you on the thing, but then we put you on a jiu-jitsu roll and all of a sudden it's a lot tougher. So sometimes VO2 max is also going to be specific to the activity that you're doing. So it's like if you have somebody do a bike or you have them do the treadmill where it's like ascending or whatever it may be.
That's like Lance Armstrong, VO2 max on the bike, insane. Does a run. Who the fuck? Like, he looks stupid.
100%. He's gassing because it's not the same. And then what's happening, more than likely, the better he's getting at biking, the more he's deconditioning his gait.
Yes. Yeah. And we've talked about that exact principle, Mike, like we want to do a study because we have a machine called the VO2 Master that like is like hooks up with Bluetooth to look at like how to create protocols that are specific to like quote skier, rower, echo bike, each individual one. Like it's just like the nerds in us, not like we'd actually do it for any other thing other than being like, where do we actually get the highest like yield of VO2 for us, the individuals?
Yes.
Because yeah, we're limited to like when we do it in our clinic, a bike, and we know that like the thing that gives out is leg strength. So
Yeah,
is it
right.
lung capacity? Is it leg strength? So we've always kind of wrestled with that, and like because we know other people too, they might be runners and they train that, like you've just mentioned.
Right.
So we've been really interested in trying to look at that. But I will say, like you made that comment about the stretching. I definitely don't like doing it because every time I've stretched, I've always hurt myself because I like unlocked new ranges of motion my body's not ready for. Like both serious injuries I've had have been a result of that. So if so
Totally.
facto, like, don't do that. I've learned. Also, I will say, don't use a massage gun plus stretching before doing something that requires
Love
load.
that. Love that. Absolutely.
Take it from me, you don't want that back pain because it's been years to fix at this point. Um, yeah, I know. I learned the hard way. It was dumb mistake. And then also, like you mentioned with like the zone two stuff and like training that, like for my last CrossFit competition, I'd started doing some zone two stuff to see if that would help elevate it. But I didn't train zone 4 or 5. So the day of the event, the first run,
Right.
like the 400 felt great. Was moving, gait felt good. I was like, damn, I feel light. I'm in my zone. You get to round 2, and I was like, if this was a 5-round workout, I would have bombed. We got lucky it was 3, but even then, I was suffering way worse than the rest of the day. And I was like, what did I not do?
Yeah.
And again, like that sports specific preparation stuff, I was like, oh yeah, like to do CrossFit or make it not feel so terrible, you do have to go through workouts that involve elevated heart rate for certain durations of time, doing specific shit, or else you will definitely suffer, or you'll internalize it as you're going through it. Like that pain cave moment is not nearly as fun. And then in the moment, I'm like, why am I here again? Like I chose to do this. I paid money to do this.
Exactly. I know. It is. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's so true. It's so true. But yeah, that is
But
always what I say. And I've actually talked about clients because clients ask about massage guns all the time. And I actually tell them that the other problem with that is that when you use the massage gun, you don't really, the thing about the myofascial release is that you have to lay there, and breathe, and be quiet and deal with your anxieties and let that ball like sink in and whatever the case may be. Like with the massage gun, you're kind of skipping all those steps. And it's just kind of this like traumatic like beat down. And I think that the fascia, some people will be fine, but I've heard of other people experiencing similar things where they're like, that actually hurt. I didn't feel good at all, Whereas I feel
Have
like
you ever had this with myofascia? I was working with like physical therapists like 10 years ago, and she was saying like the myofascia, and they were going through like the whole stuff. Like the release takes a long time, and then they're like the release can take so long, and then sometimes the release is so powerful, people have like these emotional like surges.
Sure.
And I feel like I've been seeing that. Like there's this guy like called Human Garage on the gram, and he's just been like releasing people, but he like uses trauma and like almost like a belief release and kind of like talking through it like with positive love and stuff. But like I've seen that where it's like, you release something and you have like these shakes for a while. You gotta like sit there for a minute just to capture yourself.
Yeah. Well, here's what I'll say. I won't comment on that too much, but that it can happen for sure. I think that sometimes people play into that a little bit and can be way too suggestive. And when they're being so suggestive, then they'll be like, "Oh, and do you feel that?" And but like when we're coaching people, I'm like, obviously there's a goal, so I have to be like, so but I try to at least be like, what are you feeling there? And then I get that feedback, and then I can direct it and be like, well, we're aiming for this, so let's try this. If you feel it, great. If you don't, you don't. Because in many instances, there'll be people who will be like, yeah, I think I feel it. And I can be like, you're definitely not feeling it. Like, you don't have to say that in order to appease me. You know what I'm saying? So that's why we always want to be careful with that too, because sometimes, like even with trauma stuff, people identify with it. And I'm like, well, how are we ever going to move past anything if we have such a hard identification with whatever it is that we're dealing with, And it's like, well, that my job as a coach is not to have you relive that again and again. You know what I'm saying? Like the idea is that we move forward and rewire it, you know?
Yeah, rewire everything, Yeah, I love it.
I'm-
Well, look, Marcos, we're at 120. I know we put this for 90. I just want to make sure we're respectful of Michael's time. Marcos, you got any couple last questions to cover, and we'll kind of wrap it up.
Sure.
Nah, man, I wish I was in Santa Monica to get an assessment and go through it in person because I feel like nothing replicates having a coach hands-on in my experience over the journey here recently. While I love the digital stuff and the means of that, like nothing replaces a good practitioner. Do you guys have a Vegas center as well? Do you know if there's one out here in Las Vegas?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I have to look into that.
Okay. I'll do some digging too, but yes. Yeah. But no,
Mike,
I mean,
I'll have to
dude,
visit you. I'll have to visit you soon enough.
Sure, man.
Yeah, Seamus could go for both of us.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, I work, there's a spot, Michael. I want to tell you about this, but I work at the spot on the weekends called Bod in Venice. I think the owner might have reached out to you, but they do like DEXAs, they do like movement scan diagnostics. So maybe we could talk about like the PHI scan one day, which is like a 3D analysis. But obviously, that's for another conversation.
Sure.
But yeah, I'll hit you up and see what's going on with me.
Totally.
Yeah, but dude, just really want to say it here first. Just thank you for your time and wealth of knowledge, and like it's evident you've been super passionate and like affected by like this, particular methodology to a point that obviously it carries over into people you work with, and that is evident 100%. Which, again, I'm still kind of searching and trying to find what like my spice of life is. So it's like I want to get to your level of passion at something. I hope that it's podcasting with Seamus because like we have so much fun and gain so much from people like you that we're like, fuck, we're doing everything wrong, and then we'll go talk for like an hour after the conversation. So yeah, just wanted to thank you first, man. This has been awesome, and thanks for like giving me something to think about and try to apply because I mean the spice of life is really just diving in like like you said, like you got to do it. You got to just like follow what's prescribed and really like lean into that for that period of time to see if the benefit really is there. So,
absolutely, that's right,
yeah.
And I appreciate that because that's absolutely right. It has greatly affected me, and that's why I'm such an evangelist for it. And nothing was working for me, and I definitely did not hit some sort of genetic jackpot or anything, or being like super validated for the way that I looked or the way that I moved or whatever the case may be. So it's like, how do we take somebody that doesn't have the biomechanical advantages and give them a leg up? And that I've always been super to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, yes. One last question. Can you dunk at 5'10"?
I want to be able to. I would love to be able to dunk. I can't yet, but that is going to be a goal. Absolutely. But yeah, I think somebody at 5'10" should be able to dunk for sure. But
I got short arms though,
and I could probably, to be fair, I could probably do like dunk specific training, but I wanted to learn more, just like how to play well. That was like my favorite. I want to learn how to play. Yeah. You're talking about somebody who couldn't even dribble a basketball in between their legs a year and a half ago. I mean, I literally tried to do it. I was like, how do people do this? Like, that's the level that I was at. That's the level I was at. So that gives you perspective about like where I was at from a movement perspective. I've come a long way.
Gotcha.
Got it. Okay.
But I'd love to be able to dunk.
Seamus.
I'm sure I will one day.
Yeah.
Good goal. That's when you do it, post it on the gram. We'll like it immediately.
Yeah, we'll be like, look at this.
And then I'm gonna need the program.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna need the program for sure.
Awesome. Mark, you want to roll us out of here, and we'll hit the stop here in just a sec.
Yeah. Everybody, thank you for listening to another episode today. We really appreciate everything. Again, we want to thank our guest, Michael. I didn't ask him what his preference was about that. Apologize. Okay. Again, we're going to link up the FP Santa Monica page for everything, and then Functional Patterns is where you'll be able to find that 10-week course that he's alluded to multiple times in the episode. And again, thank you guys for listening. Until next time, we're going to continue to bring on a bunch of experts in different areas that may even be a little controversial, but keep an open mind. That's what we're all about at the macro perspective. So until next time, peace out.
Right.